So, well, my ears are very cute. I'm not talking about rabbits today. So we're going to have to take them off because today we're talking about masks. And we've all put on various masks over the years, different personas, maybe to fill an expected role or to feel safe or like we belong. They become a second skin that sometimes we don't even realize are there. And so Halloween is a fun time to try on something different. Everybody knows, not real. But unfortunately, these masks, or shields, as Brene Brown calls them in her book, they're so melded in that maybe we don't even realize that they're not real. Our own self, we don't realize they're not real. And everybody struggles with vulnerability, right? But I'm going to tell you that there is an overarching way to take off this armor. And then I'll tell you more about some of the main ways. But there's one main overarching rule. I'm going to tell you at the beginning. I never do that. And here's what it is. To deal with vulnerability. It's believing we're enough. That's it. To believe that I am enough, that I've had enough, and that showing up and taking risks and letting myself be seen is enough. So we're going to look at some of the masks and shields that people use, strategies that we use to keep other people out. I like the word strategies because it reminds me of our nonviolent communication language, a strategy being something that we say, well, what I want is for you to do this thing or this to happen because that will fulfill my need. But a strategy is not actually what the need is. A strategy is just a way to get a need that I have to be filled. Like I might have a need for connection. So my strategy is saying, well, you have to do this with me. That's how I'm going to get my need met. But that's not actually the only way to get that need met. A need for connection could be made in lots of different ways with different, lots of different strategies. So strategy is kind of something we might be attached to as a way that something needs to be done, but it's not the only way. It's just, there's lots of different ways I could have driven to get here this morning from my house. Some of them would be more effective than others. But there's lots of different ways to get here. Right? So, remember that strategies. So, you ready for the first mask? Or shield? These are, according to Brene's research, she's got lots and lots of research. These are the three main ones. There's a bunch of sub ones, smaller ones, but these are, so I like that one that's based by research. Anyway, so probably no surprise, perfectionism is a shield that we use. And she says in her book, I've never heard one person attribute their joy, success, or wholeheartedness to being perfect. And there's no such thing as perfect. Have we realized that yet? And here's a few things that perfectionism is not. And so, for an example, I was thinking about like a meditation or a yoga practice. So, if we're going to put those in context of that, so perfectionism is not the same thing as striving for excellence. So, if you were in your yoga practice and you were saying, okay, well, there's a point where I'm going to get this, whatever, this pose just perfect. I'm going to get it perfect. Well, that's not what yoga is about, right? It's about doing our best, because then there's always another thing to do, another way to stretch, another way to bend, another way to expand, right? So perfection is not the same thing as striving for excellence. You can continue to strive to do it better or more clearly or more longer or whatever. But But that's not the same as perfectionism, because there's perfectionism is we have to do it right. See the difference? Perfectionism is not self-improvement. Perfectionism is trying to learn approval, what someone else is thinking, while self-improvement is thinking, how can I do better? Right? So if you were thinking about your meditation practice, if you're thinking about self-improvement, you're just like, okay, well, what can I do to make my practice better? Maybe I need to light a candle, or, maybe I need to wiggle in a different way, to sit differently, or whatever. That's about your own process of finding the best way as far as, maybe I want to do it longer, or maybe I want to do 5 short ones and meditations. Maybe that would fit better for my wiggliness, whatever. If we were wanting to do that perfect, we would be like, okay, it has to be done a certain way, and that's the only way it can be done, and I have to get the right music and the right stuff and the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, right? Those are the... And perfection is not the key to success. Because when we are attached to perfectionism, fear of failing can paralyze us. It gets us anxious. It makes us have more depression. This is not saying healthy competition is good. You can have healthy competition, and that can be helpful to get you to your goals. It's not the same as getting it perfect. A friend of mine, way back when we were in seminary, we both were like, sort of had our blogs, but we didn't write on them very often. We both wanted to, and so we had a friendly wager. And both of us had to post on our blog every week by 5 o'clock on Friday, or we owed the other person, we either had to, I don't remember what the consequences were. They weren't awful consequences. It was like, then we had to blog on something the other person chose, or something like that, so it was just something to keep us accountable, right? It was a little bit of friendly competition to keep us, that friend wrote a book based on his blogs that's out in our bookstore. So, getting in that habit of doing that, that's how we can use, but that's not perfectionism. I wasn't trying to get the perfect blog. I was just trying to get a one. So perfection is not the key to success. So you can have competition without it being like I don't need you to think I'm doing it perfect. It's not about that kind of striving. And perfectionism is definitely not a way to avoid shame. Because if I do my meditation practice, using that as an example, if I do it perfect, then you'll see me as good enough. You see, that's silly, right? If I do it good enough, you'll think if I do it perfect, you'll think I'm good enough. And that's going to keep me from feeling ashamed or like so the antidote, which is great. So we know what these things are. All of them, Brene gives us antidotes to these masks. So the antidote is appreciating the beauty of the cracks. And I went to this, a long time ago, I was part of this conference that was to bring more, there was some strife, and this is to bring some unity to that. And the facilitator said, we're going to go with good enough. Instead of saying everybody has 100% okay with whatever we come up with, if we can get to good enough where everybody feels okay with whatever it is, you can get to 60%, then we'll work with that. And then we can keep improving. And that was such a great lesson for me to learn, to remember, it doesn't have to be the perfect thing. We can just continue to improve. And so I think about like our sanctuary space, right? So we've just painted it, maybe you noticed. But it's a work in progress at the same time, we've moved things around and we're like, okay, well, we'll see what's happening. Now we could be stuck forever not doing anything because we need to know exactly how everything's going to be, and it has to be perfect, and da 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 da. And or we could say, well, let's try it, and we'll keep tweaking it, and realize that perfect we'll never get to perfect. We'll get to, we like it pretty good, and then we might have another idea and decide we need to make it better. You know, we liked it pretty good when the piano was over here. That was pretty good, except for being by the window, wasn't keeping the piano in tune very well. Okay, well, I guess that's not so good. So let's move it over there. See what happens. Yeah, so it's hard, I know, for perfectionists. I am definitely not a perfectionist, but you can get a lot more done if you're not attached to it being perfect. Good enough is good enough, and you can keep making it better. So, so the next one, the next mask, this is called numbing. And I'm going to read to you what she wrote about that because it's really good. Because we are hardwired for connection, disconnection always creates pain. Feeling disconnected can be a normal part of life and relationships, but when coupled with the shame of believing that we're disconnected because we're not worthy of connection, it creates a pain that we want to numb. So, you know, over the normal course of life, we drift away from relationships and friends and stuff, and that happens, and can be a normal thing. But when we feel like we're disconnected from our loved ones or whatever, because we're not good enough to be connected to them, then we want to make it go away. Go away that feeling of disconnection, of loneliness. And so numbing can look like a lot of things. People think, oh, well, you think of the normal, the quote-unquote normal, what's the word I'm looking for? Culprits. That's the word I'm looking for. We think, you know, food or alcohol or drugs or whatever, but there's lots of ways that we tune out our feelings. We're going to talk about that. Ooh. I just poked myself in the face. So the antidote to numbing is learning how to feel feelings, letting it be okay to feel feelings, even if it's scary. Being mindful about those numbing behaviors, and leaning into those hard emotions, which is not always comfortable. That's why we're doing this whole thing about vulnerability, right? So we get to pay attention to a lot of factors when we want to rip off that anxiety, that numbing mask, or break open that shield and be more authentic. Because anxiety and worry can keep you always vigilant, always kind of tightened up if you allow it. Brene identified two groups: those who soothe and manage their anxiety, we're always doing this thing to it, and those who endeavor to change the behaviors that lead to anxiety. It's kind of like going upstream and seeing what the problem is and fixing it instead of just dealing with the problem down. And it reminded me of this interview I had heard on the radio a while back from Shonda Rhimes, who is the creator of 2 hit television series, and she produces another. She's a very busy lady, and she's in one of those shows too. She's a very busy lady. She gets 2,500 emails a day, and she turns off her phone, her work phone, at 7 p.m. every day. She doesn't respond to emails. she decided it's not going to overtake her life. You know, that's just one example of how the anxieties, well, what about this, what about, you know, all of the things that are going on. I don't have to let that become my life. I don't have to let that become the thing that I'm always doing to cover up and keep me from being present in the moment. Because when we're always checking the email or whatever, it's just one way to cover up the anxiety of not being able to answer the right thing. Or she says you just have to be able to realize which ones you don't need to do anything with. You know, sometimes you're just copied in on stuff and you don't need to. You know, whatever it is, you just got to do that. And so, like I said, there's lots of different distracting habits and behaviors that we use to numb. Like I said, food, alcohol, and drugs. But there are many others. And it's something about, and it's about paying attention. Because obviously we need to eat. Eating has to happen. And you might find it helpful to relax by playing a game of solitaire or scrolling through the headlines on the internet. Whatever it is, we all do those things. But the question is, why do we do those things? What's the motivation for doing those things? I can go down to the fancy chocolate shop and have a chocolate piece that is amazing, and I feel satisfied. Because I just want that touch of chocolate. Now I know other people who will eat the whole bowl of Halloween candy that they have in their house. And I am not that person. I have other ways that I do things like that. But, you know, so I'm having the piece of chocolate. I really want to feel that amazing taste, you know, have that moment of bliss. Or, so why are you doing it is the question. You know, I know people who always have the television on and it's always there, and, you know, that's a habit that a lot of people grew up with. It's just sort of on in that background noise. But here's the question. What is that background noise doing for you? Is it keeping you from being present in the moment? Is it keeping you from hearing something deeper? Just a question. I'm not saying any of these things are bad on the surface, but something to ask the question to make us go deeper into our practice. When I went on, last week, I wasn't here, you might have noticed. And I was on a retreat, and I went on a silent retreat, and I went up to a cabin, and it was beautiful, and I had my phone on airplane mode so that I could just take pictures, but there was anything else could come get at me. Unless, you know, I gave Bill the number of the person running the hotel, and so if there was an emergency, he could track me down, they could come knock on my door, but otherwise, that was it, you know? And it was great, because when we turn off all the ways that the outside world can come and poke at us, give us more information, input, whatever, there's a space for other deeper truths to come forth. I had moments when I realized, oh, well, that's something I could heal. I'm holding a resentment there that I have really no logical reason to have, and I didn't even really realize it was like grumbling in there. But I had to turn off the noise to be able to say, oh, well, that was done. And then those kind of things start to happen when you give yourself space to hear. I have a friend, a long time ago, I remember getting a ride and seeing a little note, and he had written on his steering wheel, and it said, you know, in the car is quiet time or something like that, no radio. And for him, that was time to just be present with driving and himself, or God, however you want it, whatever you want to say. And so it's something to pay attention to. You know, we use their numbing techniques for us to tune out the feelings, but it also, the side effect is it tunes out our able to being plugged into our deeper selves. So both of those are good to pay attention to. So the question, that, as Brene says it, is, are my choices comforting and nourishing my spirit, or are they temporary reprieves from vulnerability and difficult emotions? Are my choices leading to my wholeheartedness, or do they leave me feeling empty and searching? So, now that we know how to get rid of that one, one really went far. So, the third one is, the third way we mask or shield is foreboding joy. You think joy is a happy thing, right? That's a deep. But it's also often when people feel the most vulnerable. Because you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. You ever had that moment where you feel so filled with joy because you just had this great moment with your pet or your loved ones, or your, you know, in the book she said, you know, watching my kids sleep or something like that, and you're like, wow, this is so amazing. And then all of a sudden you go, what happens when they're gone? Or what happens if I lose it? Or whatever. And then the little monster goes, does the thing. That's foreboding joy, right? So you're like in that, and then you make up, you use your sense of imagination, your power of imagination in a not very helpful way to come up with all these things that could happen. And then all of a sudden having joy is a bad thing. Because it makes us feel vulnerable. Because we could lose something, then we're vulnerable, right? And so the antidote is gratitude. Which is awesome, because we're getting right into November, and you know November is gratitude month. Every month is gratitude month, but especially November. So here's the thing, scarcity, or feeling like there's lack, or believing in lack, is what drives foreboding joy. Gratitude comes from knowing that we are enough and have enough. It makes perfect sense, I think. So 3 lessons about joy. Let joy come from ordinary moments. This is what came from her research of people who've been through really hard loss, hard times. Joy comes in ordinary moments. You don't wait for that, you know, moment where we're on the cruise ship going to the place, and that's the only time we can feel joy. But in the little ordinary joys of seeing a friend you didn't expect to see at Costco, or whatever it is, just those ordinary everyday joys, or the friend who always sends a card, or whatever it is, right? So feeling those. And the next one was being grateful for what you have, whatever it is you have. People who suffered a loss said, you know, when you honor what you have, you're honoring what I lost. People who had losses don't want you to stop feeling joy for what you have. You can have the joy. You're allowed to have joy. Be grateful for what you have. And the third one is don't squander joy. Don't let the monsters get it. Because here's the thing, when we let the monsters bite away and chew away at the joy that we have, we become less and less resilient and able to thrive when the real monsters come. Because we all have things happen in our lives. And so as we allow ourselves to be more vulnerable and more real and authentic in everyday moments, we are able to thrive through the not so everyday, harder moments. Like I said, there's more. This chapter is really long, but it's really interesting. But you know, we have other things to do than just hearing me talk all night. So, news is that we do know how to become more of our authentic selves. I told you the main solution at the beginning, right? It's believing that we're enough. That I am enough. So we're using worthiness instead of shame. That I've had enough. That we have created safe boundaries and we don't need to one-up someone or have comparison. That we show up and take risks and let ourselves be seen as who we really are, so we have engagement versus disengagement. This is the roadmap for a more free and joyous life. You know, I was thinking about perfectionism and thinking about, you know, practicing all these songs and getting all it, and I'm like, you know what? I could just play this few songs where I felt like I was pretty good at, but I have all these other songs I want to share. And so I have to decide that it's okay to goof up sometimes so I can share different songs. And so that's sort of me just being vulnerable and being like, oh, well, I'll screw it up and that's fine. And I'll just keep going. It's okay. So no, when I mess it up, it's because I'm being authentic and vulnerable. You know, we say the statement at the beginning, there's one presence and one power. God's good, omnipotent. And if we really remember that, I think it can help us remember that we're not alone. We are enough because we are everything. We are that. And we are not we don't need to feel disconnected from anything. So with all this research and all this experience, it's all there to show that to experience more love and belonging, all we have to do is believe that we are worthy of love and belonging. All we have to do. I know the working it out part takes a little more time, but it's really that simple. So let's go out there and take off the mask.